Hey everyone, welcome back. We're building in Minecraft today while we dive into a story that'll make your jaw drop. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones hiding the biggest lies, and when the truth finally comes out, it's like watching a carefully stacked house of cards collapse in slow motion. Before we jump in, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, everyone. I hope your holiday has been warm, safe, and full of the kind of moments you actually want to remember. And a big shout out to everyone. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Your views, comments, and messages mean a lot. I'm going to keep doing my best to help you unwind. Now let's get into some absolutely wild Reddit drama. So picture this. It's Christmas Eve. The house is decorated, the kids are asleep, and she's supposed to be resting upstairs. But something feels off. That nagging instinct that makes you get out of bed and check one more time. She walks downstairs quietly, heads toward the garage for reasons she can't quite explain, and opens the door to find her husband and their nanny tangled up together, like the secret was never meant to see daylight. I should have seen it coming earlier, but you know how it is when you're in the middle of something. You convince yourself you're being paranoid. You tell yourself that everyone gets stressed during the holidays, that the distance is normal, that you're reading too much into things. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. My husband started acting weird right around Thanksgiving. He'd be texting constantly, phone always face down on the counter, and every time I walked into a room, he'd either stop talking or suddenly need to take a call outside. He said it was work stuff, year-end deadlines, the usual excuses that sound reasonable enough when you want to believe them. Our nanny had been with us for about 8 months at that point. She was great with the kids, always on time, responsible, exactly what we needed. But sometime in early December, she started acting strange around me too. She wouldn't make eye contact, would leave rooms when I entered, seemed jumpy whenever I asked her simple questions about her day. I thought maybe she was going through something personal, maybe boyfriend drama or family issues. I even asked her once if everything was okay, and she just nodded quickly and changed the subject. I didn't push it. I wish I had. Christmas Eve arrived and the house was full of that forced holiday cheer that happens when everyone's pretending everything is perfect. We'd hosted dinner for my in-laws, the kids were wired on sugar and excitement, and I was exhausted from playing hostess all evening. Around 10 o'clock, after we'd finally gotten the kids to bed and my in-laws had left, I told my husband I was going upstairs to rest. He barely looked up from his phone, said he'd be up soon, just needed to check on something in the garage. I went upstairs, lay down for maybe 20 minutes, but I couldn't settle. Something felt off in a way I couldn't name, that nagging instinct that sits in your chest and won't let you relax. I got up thinking maybe I'd make myself some tea, try to shake off whatever anxiety was crawling under my skin. As I walked past the hallway window, I noticed the light was still on in the garage, and then I saw movement through the small window in the side door. I don't know what made me walk out there. Maybe I knew, on some level, what I was about to find. I opened the door quietly, and there they were. My husband and our nanny, pressed up against his workbench, kissing like teenagers who thought they had the house to themselves. For a second, maybe two, I just stood there frozen. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It was like watching a scene from someone else's life, something that happens to other people, not to you, not in your own garage on Christmas Eve. Then something inside me snapped into clarity. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just said very calmly, "What the hell is this?" They jumped apart like they'd been electrocuted. My husband's face went white. The nanny started crying immediately, backing away toward the corner like she could disappear into the wall. My husband started talking fast, hands up like he was trying to calm down a wild animal. "It just happened," he said. "We didn't mean for this," he said. "It's not what it looks like," he said. Every cliché excuse in the book, tumbling out one after another. I looked at the nanny and asked her directly how long. She was sobbing now, barely able to get words out, but she managed to choke out 6 months. 6 months. That word hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some drunken mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, ongoing, happening under my roof, around my children, while I paid her to be part of our family. I've got to admire the sheer nerve it takes to carry on a 6-month affair with someone who works in your house every single day. My husband tried to grab my arm, tried to talk, but I pulled away and walked straight back into the house. I could hear him following me, still making excuses, still trying to minimize what I'd just witnessed. The nanny stayed in the garage. Smart move on her part, honestly. I went upstairs to our bedroom and started pulling suitcases out of the closet. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. I knew exactly what I needed to do. He stood in the doorway asking what I was doing, as if it wasn't completely obvious, begging me to calm down, to think about this rationally, to not make any rash decisions on Christmas Eve. I told him the only rash decision I'd made was trusting him. I started packing clothes for myself and the kids, methodically, quietly, because they were asleep down the hall and I wasn't going to wake them up to this nightmare on Christmas morning. That's when he made his first big mistake. He called his parents. Within 30 minutes, my in-laws were back at the house, still in their Christmas sweaters, looking at me like I was the problem. My mother-in-law actually had the audacity to ask me to think about the children, to consider what this would do to them if I left on Christmas Eve. My father-in-law said we needed to handle this privately. As a family, that airing our problems wouldn't help anyone. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't express any concern for how I was feeling. They just immediately went into damage control mode, trying to smooth everything over, protect their son, preserve the picture-perfect family Christmas. I looked at them and said, "Your son has been sleeping with our nanny for 6 months, in our house, around our children, on our dime, and you want me to stay for the sake of Christmas morning." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother-in-law opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different tactic. "These things happen in marriages," she said. "People make mistakes. Walking out won't solve anything. We need to pray about this, work through it, think about forgiveness and family. And here's where it gets absurd." I finished packing the bags while they stood there trying to guilt me into staying. My husband oscillated between apologizing and defending himself, sometimes in the same sentence. The nanny had apparently left through the back gate at some point during all of this, which was probably the smartest thing anyone did that night. I called my sister, told her I was coming over with the kids, and asked her not to ask questions until morning. Carrying the kids out to the car was surreal. They didn't wake up, just stayed limp and heavy in that deep sleep kids fall into after an exciting day. I buckled them into their car seats while my husband stood in the driveway. Still talking, still explaining, still somehow convinced that words could fix this. His parents watched from the front door. I got in the driver's seat, and the last thing I heard before I closed the door was my mother-in-law saying we'd regret this. Christmas Day was a blur. The kids woke up confused about why we were at Aunt Sarah's house, why Daddy wasn't there, where all their presents were. I told them Dad and I had a grown-up argument, and we needed some space, that we'd figure everything out soon. They seemed to accept that with the resilience kids have, more interested in the presents my sister scrambled to get for them than in the details of adult drama. Boxing Day, I called a lawyer, first thing in the morning before I could second-guess myself, before anyone could talk me into waiting, or thinking it over, or giving him another chance. I laid out everything that happened. The lawyer asked if I had any proof of the affair. I didn't, but I told her the nanny would probably cooperate if subpoenaed, and my husband had already admitted it in front of his parents. She said that was enough to work with, and we started paperwork. Then I told both families everything. Not a sugar-coated version, not a vague explanation about growing apart. The whole truth. My family was horrified and supportive. His family went into full defense mode. I got text messages from his mother about forgiveness and moving too fast. His sister called me vindictive. His brother said I was overreacting and that men make mistakes. Overreacting. That word kept coming up. Like discovering your husband has been having an affair with the person you hired to care for your children is somehow an unreasonable thing to be upset about. Like leaving instead of playing happy family was the real problem here. The next few weeks were a masterclass in watching someone scramble. My husband hired his own lawyer and suddenly became Father of the Year, asking for custody arrangements, claiming I'd abandoned the children by taking them to my sister's house, suggesting I was emotionally unstable. The nanny vanished completely, quit via text message, didn't ask for her last paycheck, just disappeared. Can't say I blame her. His family kept trying to paint me as the villain in this story, the angry wife who couldn't forgive, who broke up the family over a mistake. But here's the thing they didn't count on. I kept every text message, every email, every communication where my husband admitted what happened, where he apologized, where he explained himself, all of it. When his lawyer tried to suggest I was making false accusations, My lawyer dropped a folder of evidence that made his arguments fall apart instantly. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments, because trust me, this night gets even messier. So there I was, standing in my own garage on Christmas Eve, watching my entire marriage crumble, while Christmas lights twinkled in the background, like the universe's cruelest joke. Now we're in the thick of divorce proceedings and custody battles. My husband is trying to get joint custody, claiming he's a devoted father who made one mistake. His family has rallied around him, created a narrative where I'm the unreasonable one, the wife who wouldn't forgive, who prioritized her pride over her family. They've told relatives and friends their version of events, painting me as cold and unforgiving. But the truth has a way of coming out. People started asking questions. Why would she leave on Christmas Eve unless something serious happened? Why would the nanny quit so suddenly without notice? Why is he fighting so hard to control the narrative? His story has holes and people are noticing. My kids are doing okay, all things considered. They miss their dad, and we've set up a temporary visitation schedule while the lawyers work everything out. I've been honest with them in age-appropriate ways. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people, and when that happens, things have to change. They seem to understand. As for me, I'm angrier than I expected to be, even months later. Not just about the affair, but about the gaslighting, the manipulation, the way his entire family closed ranks to protect him and vilify me. The way they tried to use Christmas, of all things, as emotional leverage to make me stay quiet and compliant. The sheer entitlement of expecting me to forgive and forget because it was inconvenient timing for his mistakes to have consequences. Sometimes people really do think they can have everything, the faithful wife at home and the secret affair on the side, and they're genuinely shocked when reality crashes down. I don't know how this all ends yet. The legal stuff will take months to fully resolve. But I know I made the right choice that night in the garage, even if it blew up my entire life. Some things you can't come back from. Some betrayals are too deep, too calculated, too disrespectful to forgive. And anyone who thinks you should swallow that kind of pain for the sake of appearances can frankly go spend Christmas with my ex-in-laws. The worst part might be that he still doesn't really get it. He thinks this is about the affair itself, like if he just apologizes enough or promises it won't happen again, we can go back to normal. He doesn't understand that normal's gone. That trust, once shattered this completely, doesn't just glue back together. That you can't unring this bell. But that wasn't even the worst betrayal waiting under someone's tree this year. I spent 8 months planning what I thought was going to be the perfect wedding. 8 months of Pinterest boards, vendor meetings, and those little moments where you think you're building something real with someone. My fiancé's family had welcomed me in completely. His mom and I would spend entire Saturdays together, picking out centerpieces, debating between ivory and champagne linens, like it actually mattered. His sisters helped me find the dress. His grandmother, this sweet woman in her 80s, would call me every week just to check in and ask how the planning was going. I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery, you know. I wasn't just marrying him. I was marrying into this warm, loving family that actually cared about me. Or at least, that's what I thought. The bridal shower was 2 weeks before the wedding. Everything was set. The venue was booked, the invitations had gone out months ago, and I'd already paid the final deposits on almost everything. It was supposed to be this beautiful celebration, with all the women in my life and his life coming together. His cousin Sarah was there, someone I'd only met a handful of times, but who seemed friendly enough. About 2 hours into the shower, after a few glasses of champagne, she cornered me near the gift table. She had this weird look on her face, guilty and nervous at the same time. She leaned in close and said, "I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you go through with this when everyone knows." I remember laughing at first because I genuinely had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what she meant, still smiling like an idiot. That's when she told me. My fiancé had been sleeping with his coworker for over a year. Not a few months, not some recent mistake, a full year. And here's the part that made my stomach drop. Everyone knew. His mom knew. His sisters knew. His grandmother, the woman who called me every week to chat about bouquets and cake flavors, knew. They all knew, and they'd decided together not to tell me. Sarah said they'd had family meetings about it, Actual conversations where they debated whether or not to say something. They decided it would be too messy to interfere, that maybe it would blow over, that it wasn't their place to get involved. So instead, they just watched. They watched me plan every detail of a wedding to a man who was actively betraying me. They helped me pick flowers. They smiled at fittings. They RSVP'd yes and bought gifts off our registry while knowing the whole thing was built on a lie. I don't even remember leaving the bridal shower. I think I mumbled something about feeling sick and just walked out. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd just heard. Part of me wanted to believe Sarah was lying, that maybe she was drunk and confused, or had some grudge I didn't know about. But the guilt on her face had been so real. She looked like she'd been carrying that secret around for months and finally couldn't take it anymore. I drove straight to our apartment. My fiancé was home, watching TV like it was just a normal Saturday. I stood in the doorway and asked him point blank if he was cheating on me. The look on his face told me everything before he even opened his mouth. He went pale, then red, then started stammering about how it wasn't what I thought, how he could explain. I told him Sarah had already explained plenty. Here's where it gets absurd. He admitted everything, confirmed it had been going on for over a year with someone from his office. But then, and I still can't believe he said this, he tried to defend his family. He said they didn't tell me because they didn't want to hurt me. Like watching me spend months planning a wedding and thousands of dollars on deposits was somehow less hurtful than just telling me the truth. He said his mum had begged him to end the affair and that he'd promised her he would, that she was just trying to give him space to figure things out. As if that made it okay. As if letting me walk down the aisle in 2 weeks to marry a cheater was some kind of favor. I asked him if he'd actually ended it. He looked at the floor. That told me everything. I left that night and stayed with my best friend. I barely slept. I kept running through every interaction I'd had with his family over the past 8 months, reframing every smile and every helpful suggestion through this new lens of betrayal. His mom had held my hand while I cried about wedding stress. His sister had given me advice about marriage. His grandmother had told me how lucky her grandson was to have found me. And the whole time, they knew. They all knew, and they said nothing. The next morning, I cancelled the wedding. I called the venue first, then the caterer, then the photographer. Some vendors were understanding, others weren't. I lost deposits, I lost money. I didn't care. I would have lost a lot more if I'd actually gone through with marrying him. Then I posted in our wedding Facebook group. We'd created this private group months earlier for RSVPs and updates, and it had like 150 people in it. Family, friends, co-workers, everyone who was supposed to celebrate with us. I wrote out exactly what had happened. I didn't sugarcoat it. I explained that my fiancé had been having an affair for over a year, that his entire family had known about it and chosen to keep it from me while I planned our wedding, and that the wedding was cancelled effective immediately. I thanked everyone for their support up until that point and said I was sorry for any inconvenience. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. His mom called me within 10 minutes, absolutely furious. She said I was being vindictive and cruel, that I was embarrassing the family, that I should have handled this privately. I told her she'd had 8 months to handle this privately, and instead chose to be complicit in her son's lies. I called her an accomplice because that's exactly what she was. She sputtered something about how they were trying to protect me, and I hung up on her. His sisters sent me messages calling me dramatic. His dad, who I'd barely heard from during the entire planning process, suddenly had a lot to say about how I was ruining his son's reputation. The co-worker, the one he'd been sleeping with, apparently found out about the cancelled wedding through someone at their office and sent me this unhinged message about how I was standing in the way of their happiness. Their happiness, like I was the villain in this story. But here's the thing. Most of the responses in that Facebook group weren't angry at me. They were angry at him and his family. Friends started commenting with support, saying they had no idea and were horrified. Some of his extended family members, people who apparently hadn't been in on the secret, were furious that they'd been kept in the dark too. A few of my friends offered to help me return gifts or resell decorations I'd already bought. The narrative his family tried to spin about me being unreasonable just didn't stick, because everyone could see exactly what they'd done. I kept the wedding dress. I'd already paid for it in full, and honestly, it's gorgeous. I'll either sell it eventually or have it redesigned into something I can actually use. but I wasn't about to let his family guilt me into returning it, like some kind of peace offering. My ex-fiancé tried to reach out a few times in the weeks after. He sent long texts about how he'd made a mistake, how he wanted to fix things, how his family had just been trying to help. I blocked him. I blocked his entire family. I blocked the coworker. I deleted all the wedding planning apps off my phone and unfollowed every vendor we'd hired. It's been a few months now, and I still get the occasional message from someone asking if we're going to reschedule or if there's any chance we'll work things out. The answer is no, absolutely not. I didn't just dodge a bullet, I dodged an entire firing squad. Because it wasn't just him I would have been marrying. It was that whole family, that whole system of people who thought lying to my face for 8 months was acceptable as long as it avoided conflict. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay. Actually, I took the money I would have spent on the honeymoon and went on a solo trip instead. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during wedding planning. I started therapy to work through the betrayal, not just from him, but from people I'd trusted and thought cared about me. And slowly, I'm rebuilding. The hardest part wasn't even the cheating, if I'm being honest. It was the conspiracy. It was knowing that every time his mum hugged me, or his sister texted me a funny meme, or his grandmother asked about the wedding playlist, they were all holding on to this secret. They watched me be vulnerable and excited and hopeful, and they let me stay in the dark because it was easier for them. So yeah, I lost a fiancé and a whole future I'd imagined. But I kept my dignity, I kept the dress, and I lost a tremendous amount of dead weight. And honestly, I'd make the same choice every single time. You almost have to admire the audacity of people who think lying is somehow kinder than the truth. Like watching someone plan their own humiliation is an act of love. Speaking of gifts that revealed betrayal, one person's Christmas present came wrapped in something far more damning than ribbon. So picture this, it's Christmas morning, and my Aunt Linda is handing out these neatly wrapped boxes to everyone at the family gathering. She's got this huge smile on her face like she just solved world peace. Inside each box is a DNA test kit. You know the ones, spit in a tube, mail it off, find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. She announces it's going to be a fun bonding experience for the whole family. We can compare results, find distant cousins, maybe discover we're related to someone famous. Everyone kind of laughs it off but agrees because why not? It's just a silly gift, a harmless way to learn more about our ancestry. I remember thinking it was actually kind of sweet in a quirky way. My aunt has always been into genealogy and family history. She's the one who keeps all the old photo albums organized and knows everyone's birthday without needing Facebook reminders. This felt very on brand for her, so we all do the test that week. Swab our cheeks, seal the tubes, send them off. Then we basically forget about it because life gets busy, and honestly, nobody was expecting anything earth-shattering. We figured we'd get our results in a few weeks, have a laugh about percentages, and move on. January rolls around and the emails start coming in. Results are ready. I log into my account first, and it's exactly what I expected. Boring. Predictable. A breakdown of European ancestry that matches what my grandparents always told us. I share it in the family group chat, and a few cousins do the same. Everyone's comparing their little pie charts and making jokes about who got the most Viking blood or whatever. It's light-hearted. Fun even. Then my dad calls me. His voice sounds weird. Tight, like he's trying very hard to stay calm, but something is seriously wrong. He asks if I've looked at the DNA matches section, the part where it shows you relatives who've also taken the test. I tell him I glanced at it but didn't pay much attention. He tells me to look again, really look. So I do. That's when I see it. My uncle's name is there, listed as a match to my dad. But the relationship label doesn't say full sibling. It says half sibling. I stare at the screen for a solid 30 seconds, trying to make sense of it. There has to be a mistake, right? These tests aren't perfect. Maybe the algorithm got confused. But my dad is already spiraling. He's pulled up his results and my uncle's results, and he's cross-referencing everything. The shared DNA percentage is right there in black and white. They share about 25% of their DNA. That's half siblings, not full. My dad and my uncle have been brothers their entire lives. They grew up in the same house, shared a bedroom, fought over toys, went to each other's weddings. They're best friends, and now this test is telling them they only share one biological parent. My dad immediately assumes it's their mum, that my grandmother had an affair. But that doesn't sit right with him because my grandmother was the most straight-laced, church-going, moral woman you'd ever meet. The idea of her having an affair seems impossible. But here's where it gets absurd. My dad decides he needs to talk to my grandmother before confronting my uncle. He drives over to her house that same evening. She's in her 80s now, still sharp as a tack but frail. He sits her down and very gently explains what the DNA test revealed. He watches her face the entire time, looking for any sign of guilt or surprise, and my grandmother just goes completely silent. Not confused silent, knowing silent. My dad later told me it was the longest minute of his life. Finally, she speaks. She doesn't deny it. She doesn't act shocked. She just sighs this deep, heavy sigh like she's been carrying a weight for decades, and it's finally too much. Then she tells him the truth. It wasn't her, it was my grandfather. He had an affair early in their marriage before my dad was born. The woman got pregnant. My grandfather begged her not to tell anyone, and somehow he convinced my grandmother to raise the baby as their own. My uncle was that baby. My grandmother agreed because divorce wasn't really an option back then, and she loved my grandfather despite everything. So she took in this child and raised him like he was hers. Nobody ever knew, not even my uncle. My dad is absolutely gutted. He doesn't know what to do with this information. He's angry at his parents for the lie, heartbroken for his brother, and completely lost on how to move forward. He sits in my grandmother's living room for over an hour just processing. She keeps apologizing, saying she thought the secret would die with her. She never imagined anyone would find out. And honestly, if it weren't for my aunt's well-meaning Christmas gift, nobody ever would have. Then came the breaking point. My dad realizes he has to tell my uncle. There's no way around it. My uncle is going to see the DNA results eventually, and it's better he hears the truth from family than figures it out alone. So my dad calls him and asks to meet. They go to a diner, somewhere neutral, and my dad just lays it all out. He shows him the test results, explains what my grandmother said, and waits. My uncle's reaction is somehow worse than my dad expected. He doesn't yell, he doesn't cry, he just shuts down, completely. He stares at the table and doesn't say a word for what feels like forever. Then he stands up and walks out, just leaves. My dad tries calling him for days afterward, but my uncle won't pick up, won't respond to text, nothing. The family starts fracturing almost immediately. My uncle finally agrees to talk, but only to demand answers from my grandmother. That conversation apparently goes about as well as you'd expect. He's furious that she lied to him his entire life. Furious that my grandfather, the man he thought was his father, wasn't. Furious that everyone just decided he didn't deserve to know the truth. My grandmother tries to explain that she was protecting him, that it was a different time, that she did what she thought was best. But my uncle isn't hearing it. He feels betrayed on every possible level. Family dinners become war zones. The first one after everything came out was supposed to be my cousin's birthday lunch. Casual, low-key, it turned into a screaming match between my uncle and my dad because my dad made some comment about how they're still brothers no matter what, and my uncle snapped. Told him he didn't get to decide what their relationship meant anymore, that everything they'd built was based on a lie. My dad tried to argue that the love was real even if the biology wasn't, but my uncle wasn't interested in philosophical debates. He left halfway through and didn't come back. And then there's my aunt, poor Aunt Linda, the woman who just wanted to give a fun genealogy gift for Christmas. She's being blamed for all of it. My uncle won't speak to her. Some of the older relatives are giving her the cold shoulder like she personally destroyed the family. She's devastated. She keeps saying she had no idea, that she never would have suggested the tests if she'd known, that she's so sorry. But the damage is done. They handed over the rope and tied the knot themselves. My grandmother kept a secret for 60 years, thinking it would protect everyone, but all it did was create a ticking time bomb. And my aunt, with the best intentions, lit the fuse without even knowing it existed. My uncle eventually started going to therapy to process everything. He's slowly rebuilding his relationship with my dad, but it's different now, strained. There's this awkwardness that wasn't there before. He still hasn't forgiven my grandmother, and honestly, I'm not sure he ever will. She passed away about a year after all this happened, and my uncle didn't go to the funeral. That tells you everything you need to know about where they left things. As for my dad, he's caught in the middle of it all, trying to be there for his brother while also grieving the parents he thought he knew. He's told me more than once that he wishes my aunt had just given everyone socks that Christmas. At least those don't come with existential crises. The whole thing is a mess, a completely avoidable mess that spiraled out of control because someone thought a DNA test would be a cute bonding activity. And the worst part? There's no villain here. My grandmother made a choice decades ago that she thought was right. My aunt gave a gift with zero malicious intent. My uncle is justified in his anger. My dad is justified in his confusion. Everyone's feelings are valid and yet everyone's miserable. It's been a few years now and things have settled into a new normal. Family gatherings are smaller, quieter. My uncle comes to some but not all. When he does show up, he's polite but distant. The warmth that used to define our family is just gone, replaced by this uncomfortable tension that everyone pretends not to notice. And every single Christmas since, when someone suggests a group gift idea, the room goes dead silent. Nobody's making that mistake again. While some families were imploding over biology, another person discovered their parents had been protecting someone else's lies all along. I was 16 when my stepmom decided to destroy my relationship with my dad, and the worst part is how easy it was for her. We'd never gotten along great, but I thought we'd reached this kind of neutral coexistence where we stayed out of each other's way. I was wrong. She'd been looking for an opportunity to take me down, and one afternoon she found it. I came home from school and my dad was waiting in the kitchen with his arms crossed. That's never a good sign. He asked me point blank if I'd taken money from their bedroom. I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him no, obviously not, why would I steal from him? He didn't believe me. He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot my stepmom had sent him. It was a Venmo transaction from my account to some random username for $200 with a note that said, "Thanks for the help." I stared at it completely confused because I'd never sent that payment. I didn't even recognize the username. I tried to explain that it had to be fake, that someone must have photoshopped it or something, but my dad wasn't hearing it. My stepmom came into the kitchen right on cue, playing the victim perfectly. She had tears in her eyes talking about how disappointed she was, how she'd tried so hard to build a relationship with me, and this is how I repaid their trust. She said the money had been sitting on their dresser for a cash payment they needed to make, and now it was gone. She'd checked her Venmo and seen I'd sent money to my friend right around the same time. The implication was clear. I'd stolen cash and sent my friend digital payment to cover something up. It was complete fiction, all of it. But my dad believed her instantly. He didn't ask for my side. He didn't question why the story didn't quite make sense. He just accepted her version and decided I was a liar and a thief. He grounded me for a month, took away my car keys, and here's the part that still makes my blood boil. He made me apologize to her in front of our extended family at Sunday dinner that weekend. I had to stand there in my grandmother's dining room while my dad explained to everyone that I'd stolen money and been caught, and that I needed to apologize for my behavior and for breaking their trust. My stepmom sat there with this sad, forgiving expression while I choked out an apology I didn't mean for something I didn't do. My aunts and uncles looked at me with disappointment. My cousins seemed shocked. My grandmother actually shook her head like she couldn't believe I'd sink so low. The humiliation was crushing. I felt small and powerless and completely alone. The worst part was knowing I was innocent and having absolutely no way to prove it. How do you fight a fake screenshot? How do you convince someone who's already decided you're guilty? I spent the next 3 weeks basically invisible in my own house. My dad barely spoke to me except to remind me of my restrictions. My stepmom acted gracious and forgiving, which somehow made it worse. She'd won and she knew it. But I wasn't going to let it end there. I started thinking about how to protect myself from future accusations, because I knew this wouldn't be the last time. If she'd frame me once, she'd do it again. So I took my savings and bought a small camera. One of those cheap ones you can hide on a bookshelf that connects to your phone. I set it up in the living room pointing toward the couch and the kitchen entrance, just in case. Just to have evidence if she tried something else. I didn't expect to catch anything for a while. I figured I'd have it running for months before anything useful showed up. But 3 days later, I got lucky. I was at school when I got a motion notification on my phone from the camera. I opened the app during lunch and saw my stepmom on the couch talking on the phone. I almost dismissed it, but something made me keep watching. She was laughing, really laughing, in a way that seemed too comfortable, too pleased with herself. Then I heard what she was saying. She was talking to her sister, my aunt by marriage, The same aunt who'd been at that Sunday dinner. She was bragging about framing me. Using those exact words, she told her sister that I'd been getting too comfortable, too confident, that I needed to be taken down a peg. She laughed about how easy it was to fake the Venmo screenshot, how my dad didn't even question it, how I'd stood there and apologized in front of everyone like a little criminal. Her sister was laughing too, saying something about how I probably deserved it for being a brat. I sat in the school cafeteria watching this video with my hands shaking. I was furious and vindicated and terrified all at once. I finally had proof, real, undeniable proof that she'd lied, that she'd deliberately destroyed my reputation and my relationship with my dad for her own sick satisfaction. I saved the video to 3 different places immediately. Then I went home and waited for my dad. When he got back from work, I asked him to sit down. I told him I had something he needed to see. I pulled up the video on my laptop and hit play. I watched his face the entire time. He went from confused to shocked to horrified in the span of about 90 seconds. When the video ended, he just sat there staring at the screen. I waited for the apology, for the anger at her, for him to storm off and confront her, for some kind of justice. And here's where it gets absurd. He asked me to delete the video. He said we needed to move past this as a family. That yes, what she did was wrong, but airing it out would only make things worse. He actually used the phrase, for the good of the family, like we were some kind of political dynasty instead of a broken household held together by lies. He said he'd talk to her, that he'd make sure she apologized to me privately, that we could work through this if we all just tried harder. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His wife had framed his daughter, humiliated her in front of the entire family, and his response was to ask me to sweep it under the rug, to protect her, to protect himself from the embarrassment of admitting he'd chosen wrong. I told him absolutely not. I told him that everyone who watched me apologize for something I didn't do deserved to know the truth. He begged me not to send it. Actually begged, said it would destroy his marriage, ruin family relationships, make everything so much harder. I looked at him and said, good. She deserves to have her lies exposed, and you deserve to face the consequences of believing her over me without a second thought. That night, I sent the video to every single person who'd been at that Sunday dinner. My grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. I sent it to my stepmom's sister too, so she could see herself laughing about my humiliation. I wrote a short message explaining what had happened, how I'd been framed, and how my dad had asked me to cover it up. Then I called my mum, who I'd been living away from since the divorce because her apartment was smaller and farther from my school, and asked if I could move in with her. She said yes immediately. The fallout was nuclear. My phone blew up within an hour. My grandmother called my dad furious. My aunts were horrified. A few cousins reached out to apologize for judging me. My stepmom's sister apparently stopped talking to her, which honestly was the least of what she deserved. My dad called me crying, saying I'd ruined everything, that his marriage was falling apart, that the family was in chaos. I told him he'd done this to himself by choosing a liar over his own daughter. My stepmom tried to do damage control. She sent messages to family members claiming the video was out of context, that it was a joke she and her sister were sharing, that I'd manipulated the footage somehow. But nobody bought it. You can't explain away laughing about framing a teenager and calling her a brat who needed to be humiliated. The words were right there, clear as day. I moved in with my mom the following weekend. My dad tried to stop me, said we could fix this if I just came home and talked it through. I told him there was nothing to fix. He'd made his choice when he believed her fake screenshot without question. He'd made his choice when he forced me to apologize in front of everyone. And he'd definitely made his choice when he asked me to delete evidence of her abuse to protect his marriage. It's been almost 2 years now. My dad and I talk occasionally, but it's surface level. He's still with her, which tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. They went to counseling apparently. She fed him some story about being insecure and making a mistake. He bought it because he needed to believe his marriage was salvageable. The family is still fractured. Some people sided with my dad, saying I overreacted by exposing everything so publicly. Most people understood why I did it. I don't regret it for a second. She wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel powerless, to turn my own father against me. Instead, she exposed herself. She gave me all the rope I needed, and I just stood back and watched her use it. My dad still sends me messages sometimes, asking when I'll be ready to forgive and move forward. I don't answer those anymore, because forgiveness isn't something you're owed just because time has passed. It's something you earn by acknowledging what you did wrong and actually changing. And he's done neither. But sometimes the lies don't come from family at all. Sometimes your closest friends know the truth and watch you suffer anyway. I spent 3 weeks planning what I thought was going to be the perfect surprise party for my boyfriend. He'd just gotten this huge promotion at work, the kind that comes with a real title and actual money, and I wanted to celebrate him properly. I booked a private room at his favorite restaurant, coordinated with all our friends, even reached out to some of his coworkers to make sure the people he spent the most time with could be there. I made a playlist of his favorite songs, ordered a custom cake, put together this whole photo slideshow of us over the past 2 years. I was so proud of myself. I really thought I was doing something special. The night of the party, I got there early to set everything up. People started trickling in, and I was running around making sure everyone had drinks, that the food was coming out on time, that his boss knew to give a little speech. I was in full hostess mode, riding this high of pulling off something I thought he'd love. Then she walked in, his coworker, the one he'd mentioned before in passing, always with this casual, "oh, we work on projects together" energy. I'd never met her in person. She was prettier than I expected. And the second she walked into that room, something in my gut twisted. Not because of how she looked, but because of how she carried herself. Like she belonged there. Like she knew something I didn't. She made a beeline for him the moment he arrived. Didn't even say hello to me first. Just went straight to him with this huge smile and a hug that lasted too long. I watched them from across the room and told myself I was being paranoid. This was his coworker. Of course they'd be friendly. Of course she'd congratulate him. But then the inside jokes started. Little comments about things that happened at the office, stories I'd never heard, moments they'd apparently shared that I wasn't part of. She touched his arm when she laughed. He leaned in when she whispered something, and every time I walked over to join the conversation, the energy shifted, like I was interrupting something. I spent the entire party feeling like an outsider at an event I'd planned. My best friend was there, watching all of this unfold, and every time I caught her eye, she'd just give me this tight smile and look away. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was being insecure for no reason. Maybe work-wife dynamics were just like that, and I needed to get over myself. So I pushed it down, smiled through the speeches, cut the cake, and pretended everything was fine. The party ended and I went home feeling weird. Not angry yet, just unsettled. Like something was off but I couldn't name it. My boyfriend thanked me for the party, said it was great, and fell asleep almost immediately. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd witnessed, trying to talk myself out of what my instincts were screaming at me. The next morning, my best friend called, said she needed to talk to me in person. We met for coffee and I could tell something was wrong the second I saw her face. She looked guilty, nervous, like she was about to confess something terrible. And she was. She told me she'd known for 3 months that my boyfriend was having an affair with his coworker. The same coworker who'd shown up at the party I'd thrown. She'd seen them together at a restaurant across town, holding hands, kissing, acting like a couple. She'd recognized them immediately, and instead of saying something, instead of texting me right then or pulling me aside later, she'd just kept it to herself. For 3 months. She sat there and watched me plan a surprise party for a man who was actively cheating on me. Watched me invite his mistress. Watched me celebrate him while he made a fool out of me in front of everyone. I asked her why. Why would she keep that from me? And her answer made me want to scream. She said she didn't want to ruin my happiness, that I seemed so in love, so excited about the promotion and the party, and she couldn't bring herself to destroy that. She said she kept hoping it would end on its own, that maybe it was just a phase, that maybe I'd be better off not knowing. But that wasn't even the worst part. She'd watched me stress over centerpieces and cake flavors and whether to do a slideshow or not. She'd helped me pick out an outfit for the party. She'd stood in that room and watched his coworker touch him like she owned him and said nothing. She let me be humiliated in front of all our friends while sitting on information that could have spared me all of it. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I confronted my boyfriend that same day. Didn't even wait to process what my friend had told me. Just drove straight to his place and asked him point blank if he was sleeping with his coworker. He tried to deny it at first, said my friend was mistaken, that she must have seen him with someone else. But I didn't budge. I told him I knew, that I had details, that lying would only make it worse. And finally he admitted it, said it had been going on for a few months, said it didn't mean anything, said he still loved me and wanted to work it out. I left without saying another word, packed up anything of his I had at my place, dropped it on his doorstep the next day, and blocked him everywhere. Then I called my best friend and told her we were done too. She cried, begged me to understand that she was trying to protect me, and I told her the truth. Complicity isn't protection. Watching someone you claim to care about walk into humiliation and saying nothing isn't kindness, it's cowardice. She had 3 months to tell me, 3 months to pull me aside and say, "Hey, I saw something you need to know about." Instead, she let me throw a party where I unknowingly invited my boyfriend's mistress and celebrated a relationship that was already over. She tried to argue that it wasn't her place, that she didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, that she thought maybe I'd be happier not knowing. But here's the thing. I wasn't happy. I was being lied to. There's a difference. And she chose his comfort and her own avoidance over my right to know the truth about my own life. Imagine thinking that letting your best friend plan a party for her cheating boyfriend is somehow an act of love. I haven't spoken to either of them since. It's been almost a year now. My ex has tried to reach out a few times, sent apology texts that I delete without reading. My former best friend sent me a long letter about 6 months ago, explaining her perspective, asking for forgiveness, saying she misses me. I didn't respond, because what is there to say? She made her choice. She chose silence and complicity over honesty and friendship, and that's not something I can just get over. People have asked me if I think I overreacted. If ending a years-long friendship over one mistake was too harsh, and my answer is always the same. It wasn't one mistake. It was 3 months of active choices. Every day she woke up knowing what she knew and decided not to tell me was another betrayal. Every conversation we had where she asked how I was doing or how the party planning was going, while knowing my relationship was a lie, was another layer of deception. She didn't make a split-second bad call. She maintained a sustained pattern of dishonesty, and that's not friendship. The weirdest part is how much lighter I feel now. I thought losing 2 important people in my life at the same time would devastate me. And it did for a while, but once I got through the initial grief, I realized I wasn't actually losing anything real. My boyfriend was a cheater. My best friend was a coward. Neither of them respected me enough to be honest, and staying connected to people who fundamentally don't respect you is just choosing to carry dead weight. I've rebuilt since then, made new friends who actually have my back, started dating someone who doesn't have a work wife or a secret second life, and I've learned to trust my instincts more. That night at the party, my gut knew something was wrong. I should have listened to it instead of talking myself out of what I was seeing. Looking back, the only thing I regret is not confronting it sooner, not trusting myself enough to ask the hard questions earlier. But I don't regret cutting them both off. Some betrayals are too fundamental to come back from, and this was one of them. And while we're talking about people staying silent when they shouldn't, one person finally found their voice after years of swallowing the truth. I spent 3 years being the perfect daughter-in-law, 3 years of biting my tongue, forcing smiles, and pretending I didn't hear the little digs my in-laws constantly threw my way. My career, too demanding for a wife and mother. My cooking, not as good as what their son grew up eating. My parenting, too lenient, too strict, too modern, too whatever they decided was wrong that particular week. Every family gathering was a minefield of passive-aggressive comments, disguised as concern or helpful suggestions. And every single time, my husband would give me the same speech. That's just how they are. They mean well. They're from a different generation. Please just let it go for the sake of family harmony. So I did. I let it go over and over again because I loved him and because I genuinely believed that keeping the peace was the mature thing to do. That being the bigger person meant absorbing their toxicity with grace. I showed up to every holiday dinner with a smile. I brought dishes I'd spent hours preparing just to watch my mother-in-law take one bite and mention how her version was better. I dressed nicely but not too nicely because that would be showing off. I talked about my work but not too much because that would be bragging. I played with my kids but not too loud because that would be disruptive. I existed in this constant state of, walking on eggshells, trying to be acceptable to people who had decided before they even met me that I wasn't good enough for their son. The comments were never outright cruel enough to call out in the moment. That's what made them so insidious. Little things like, "Oh, you're feeding the baby that brand," with just enough judgment in the tone to sting. Or, "I'm surprised you have time for book club with your schedule," implying I was neglecting something more important. Or my personal favorite, "Well, we raised our son to value family above everything," said while looking directly at me after I mentioned working late on a project. My husband would always defend them later in private, say I was reading too much into things, that his mum was just making conversation. But I wasn't imagining it. I felt it in my chest every time. That specific kind of hurt that comes from being systematically diminished by people who smile while they do it. Thanksgiving this year started like every other holiday. I made 3 dishes from scratch, got the kids dressed in nice outfits, and drove to his parents' house with that familiar knot in my stomach. The usual cast of characters was there: his parents, his sister and her husband, his brother, a couple of aunts and uncles. We sat down to dinner and I was already mentally preparing for whatever comments would come my way. The meal was going as expected. Small talk, some stories, the kids being mostly well behaved. I was actually starting to relax a little, thinking maybe this time would be different. Then dessert came out. My mother-in-law had made her famous pumpkin pie, the one she never shuts up about, the one that apparently defines her worth as a human being. Everyone was complimenting it as usual, and she was soaking up the praise. Then she looked directly at me, smiled this cold little smile, and said it, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You know, I really raised my son better than to end up with someone so beneath him." The table went quiet, not uncomfortable, shifting quiet. Dead silent. My husband's face went pale. His sister looked at her plate. His dad cleared his throat but said nothing, and I just sat there for a moment, fork halfway to my mouth, processing what had just happened. She'd finally said it, out loud, in front of everyone, the thing she'd been implying for 3 years with her little comments and her disapproving looks. And here's where it gets absurd. Something in me just snapped, not in an explosive throw the pie kind of way, in a calm, crystalline moment of clarity where I realized I was done, completely done. Done pretending this was normal, done protecting her feelings, done being the punching bag for the sake of family harmony. I set down my fork, took a sip of water, and then I started talking. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just calmly, methodically listed every cruel thing she'd said to me over the past 3 years. The comment about my career being selfish when I got promoted, the remark about my parenting being too soft when I didn't spank my kids, the dig about my cooking when I brought homemade lasagna to Easter, the implication that I trapped her son into marriage when we announced our engagement, the suggestion that I wasn't devoted enough to family when I couldn't make it to a random Tuesday lunch. I looked her right in the eye and told her exactly what I thought of her manipulative behavior, that her passive aggression was transparent and pathetic, that her need to tear me down said everything about her own insecurities and nothing about my worth, that I had spent 3 years being patient and kind and trying to earn approval from someone who was never going to give it because she fundamentally couldn't handle her son choosing anyone over her. Then came the breaking point. I turned to my husband and told him we were leaving. Right then, no discussion, and we weren't coming back until he grew a spine and started defending his wife instead of making excuses for his mother's cruelty. I stood up, got the kids' coats, and walked to the door. The table was still silent, completely frozen. My mother-in-law's mouth was hanging open. My father-in-law was staring at his plate. My husband was mortified, stammering something about talking this through, about not leaving like this. I told him he had 2 choices. He could come with us now, or he could stay and explain to his family why his marriage was falling apart. He grabbed his coat. The car ride home was tense. He kept trying to say I'd overreacted, that I'd embarrassed him, that I should have pulled him aside privately if I was upset. And I just laughed. Actually laughed, because after 3 years of being told to stay quiet, to be the bigger person, to let things go, he was upset that I'd finally defended myself. I told him I was done being quiet, done making myself smaller to make his family comfortable, done pretending their behavior was acceptable. That night, after the kids were in bed, we had the longest conversation of our marriage. I told him everything I'd been holding in, How isolated I felt, how unsupported, how every holiday left me feeling worthless, and how his constant defense of their behavior made me feel like he was choosing them over me. He cried, actually cried, said he didn't realize how bad it had gotten, that he'd been so focused on avoiding conflict that he hadn't seen what it was costing me. We started marriage counseling the following week. It's been 2 months now, and things are different. He's setting boundaries with his family for the first time in his life. He told his mother that her comment was unacceptable and that we wouldn't be attending family events until she apologized. She hasn't. She sent messages to him claiming I'm being dramatic, that I took things out of context, that I'm trying to isolate him from his family. But he's not backing down. His sister actually reached out to me privately and apologized. Said she'd always thought her mum was too harsh, but never knew how to address it. Said watching me finally stand up for myself made her realize how toxic the family dynamic had become. His brother hasn't said anything, but he's been noticeably quiet in the family group chat, where his mum usually holds court. The thing is, I don't regret it. Not for a second. People keep asking if I feel bad about ruining Thanksgiving, about causing family drama, about putting my husband in that position. And the answer is no. I feel free. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in 3 years. I spent so long prioritizing other people's comfort over my own dignity, and I'm done with that version of myself. My mother-in-law still hasn't apologized. I doubt she ever will. People like her don't apologize because that would require acknowledging they did something wrong, and her entire identity is built on being the perfect matriarch who knows best. But she's learned something important. I won't be silent anymore. I won't smile through her cruelty, and I won't prioritize her feelings over my own self-respect. The family dynamics have shifted. Holidays are quieter now. It's just us and my family, and honestly, it's peaceful. My husband is still working through his guilt about setting boundaries, but he's getting there. Our marriage is stronger because we're finally on the same team, instead of me being a guest he's constantly apologizing for. There's this idea that keeping the peace is noble, that suffering in silence makes you the bigger person. But all it really does is protect bullies and enable bad behavior. The second you decide your peace matters more than theirs, everything changes. Some people stayed silent too long, while others spoke up in the most public way possible. We'd been planning this night for weeks. It was our 1-year anniversary, and my girlfriend wanted to do something different, something we'd both enjoy instead of the usual dinner and a movie routine. She suggested a basketball game. Neither of us were huge sports fans, but the energy of a live game sounded fun, and honestly, I would have agreed to anything that made her happy. So I bought tickets, decent seats about halfway up, and we showed up ready to have a good time. The game itself was entertaining enough. We bought overpriced nachos, yelled at calls we didn't fully understand, and laughed at ourselves for getting into it. It was one of those nights where everything just feels easy, you know? Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the right person. During a timeout in the third quarter, the Jumbotron started doing its kiss cam bit. The usual thing where they zoom in on couples in the crowd and everyone cheers while they kiss. We were joking about how awkward it would be if they picked us when the camera landed on a couple 3 rows ahead of us. The guy was tall, wearing a nice button down, and he had his arm around a woman in a red dress. The crowd started cheering, and he turned to her with this huge grin and kissed her. Not a quick peck either, a full-on, enthusiastic, look at us, we're so in love kind of kiss. The kind that makes the crowd go wild. Everyone around us was clapping and laughing. I was about to make some joke about it when I heard my girlfriend gasp next to me. I looked over and her face had gone completely white. She was staring at the Jumbotron like she'd seen a ghost. I asked her what was wrong, and she just pointed at the screen with a shaking hand. The couple was still on camera, waving now, and that's when she said it. "That's my ex-husband." I felt my stomach drop. I'd heard about her ex plenty of times. They'd been divorced for almost 3 years, but he'd apparently never fully let go. He'd text her occasionally with vague messages about missing what they had, asking how she was doing, hinting that maybe they'd made a mistake ending things. She'd always declined to meet up, but I know part of her was still processing that relationship, still working through what it meant that he seemed to want her back while she'd moved on. And here he was, 3 rows ahead of us, kissing another woman on the kiss cam at a basketball game. My girlfriend was shaking. actually physically shaking. I put my arm around her and asked if she wanted to leave, but she just kept staring. The woman he was kissing had her left hand visible on the armrest, and there was a ring. An engagement ring. Big, obvious, impossible to miss. My girlfriend's voice came out barely above a whisper. He told me he was on a work trip this week. He texted me 2 days ago. We sat through the rest of the game in this stunned silence. I don't think either of us actually watched what was happening on the court. We were both just trying to process what we'd seen. When we got back to her place, she pulled out her phone and started scrolling through his social media. She'd never unfollowed him, never blocked him, because part of her still wanted to believe they could be friendly exes or whatever. Big mistake. His Instagram was private, but his Facebook wasn't. And there it was, an engagement announcement from 4 months ago. Photos of him and the woman from the kiss cam at a restaurant, her showing off the ring, him looking proud and happy. The comments were full of congratulations from friends and family. 4 months. He'd been engaged for 4 months while still texting my girlfriend about missing her, while telling her he wasn't seeing anyone serious, while keeping that door cracked open just enough to mess with her head. She started going through their recent messages, and I watched her face crumble. There were texts from 3 weeks ago where he'd asked if she ever thought about them getting back together. Texts from a month before that, where he'd said he still loved her, all of it while he was engaged to someone else. He wasn't keeping her as a backup plan, he was just keeping her on the hook for his own ego, making sure she still cared while he moved on publicly with someone new. That's when everything unraveled. She started crying, not because she wanted him back, but because she felt so completely manipulated. She'd spent 3 years thinking maybe they'd ended things too quickly, maybe there was still something there worth exploring, and the whole time he'd been using her emotional availability as some kind of validation while building a whole life with someone else. The texts weren't about reconciliation, they were about power. About making sure she still thought about him even when he'd fully committed to moving on. She blocked him on everything that night. Phone number, social media, email, everything. Then she did something I didn't expect. She filed a harassment report, not because she thought anything legal would come of it, but because she wanted documentation. Proof that this had been happening, that he'd been contacting her under false pretenses while engaged to another woman. Her therapist had suggested months ago that some of his behavior bordered on emotional manipulation, and she'd brushed it off. Now she wanted it on record. A few days later, things took another turn. The kiss cam moment had been shown on sports highlights that week. It was one of those viral clips that local sports channels love. Cute couple at the game, enthusiastic kiss, crowd goes wild. Except it wasn't cute, it was evidence. His fiancée saw the clip. Someone tagged her in it on social media, probably thinking she'd enjoy seeing herself and her fiancé on TV. Instead, she recognized my girlfriend from his old Facebook photos. She put 2 and 2 together, did some digging, and called my girlfriend directly. The conversation was apparently surreal. 2 women who'd never met, comparing notes on the same man who'd been lying to both of them. His fiancée had no idea he'd been texting his ex. He'd told her my girlfriend was completely out of the picture, that the divorce had been mutual and they'd both moved on cleanly. She'd believed him because why wouldn't she? Meanwhile, my girlfriend had no idea he was engaged because he'd actively hidden it while trying to keep her emotionally invested. They talked for over an hour, shared screenshots, compared timelines, realized he'd been playing both of them in different ways. His fiancée was devastated but also furious. She called off the engagement that night. Then she did what any reasonable person would do in the age of social media. She exposed him. She posted a detailed thread on Facebook explaining what had happened. No names at first, just a story about discovering her fiancé had been emotionally manipulating his ex while engaged. But people figured it out fast. Mutual friends started commenting. His family got involved. Someone shared the kiss cam clip again with new context, and it went semi-viral in local circles. Suddenly everyone knew. His co-workers, his friends, his family. The guy who looked so happy kissing his fiancée on the Jumbotron was actually a manipulative liar who'd been stringing along 2 women for his own benefit. The audacity of doing all that and then ending up on a kiss cam is almost poetic. My girlfriend has been processing all of this in therapy. She's angry at herself for not seeing it sooner, for letting him keep a foot in the door for so long. But mostly she's relieved. Relieved that she found out before she ever considered giving him another chance. Relieved that his fiancée found out before marrying him. And relieved that a stupid kiss cam at a basketball game ended up being the thing that exposed everything. His attempts to reach out after the fallout were pathetic. He tried creating new accounts to message both of them, sent emails from addresses they didn't recognize, even had a friend contact my girlfriend to say he wanted to apologize in person. She ignored all of it. His ex-fiancée did the same. They'd compared notes, realized the scope of his manipulation, and decided he didn't deserve any more of their time or energy. It's been a few months now, and my girlfriend is in a completely different place. She's not looking over her shoulder wondering if he'll text. She's not second-guessing her decision to move on. She's just free of him in a way she wasn't before. And honestly, our relationship is stronger for it. She's more present, more trusting, more willing to be fully in this with me, instead of keeping part of herself reserved for some hypothetical reconciliation that was never real to begin with. As for him, last I heard he's single, and his social life has taken a serious hit. Mutual friends stopped inviting him to things. His family is apparently disappointed and confused, and the woman he'd been engaged to is thriving, posting about new hobbies and adventures, and generally living her best life without him. The whole thing could have been avoided if he'd just been honest. If he'd let his ex move on completely instead of keeping her on the hook. If he'd committed to his fiancée instead of hedging his bets. But he didn't. He chose manipulation and ego, and it all fell apart in the most public way possible. Kiss cams catch cheaters, but sometimes proof arrives without any cameras at all. Just one perfectly timed moment. I'd been feeling it for months. That specific kind of anxiety that sits in your chest and won't go away no matter how many times you tell yourself you're being paranoid. My partner had started working late more frequently. Not every night, but enough that it felt like a pattern. He'd come home exhausted, sometimes smelling like hotel soap instead of his usual routine. When I asked about it, he had explanations that made sense on the surface. Big project at work, client dinners that ran long, overnight stays in the city because it was too late to drive home. I had no proof of anything, no suspicious texts because he kept his phone face down now, no weird charges on our joint account because he'd started using a separate card for work expenses. Nothing concrete, just this gut feeling that something was off. And every time I tried to bring it up, he made me feel crazy for even asking. He'd get hurt, say he couldn't believe I didn't trust him after all these years, remind me that he'd never given me a reason to doubt him before. So I swallowed it, pushed down the anxiety, and tried to be the supportive partner who didn't question every late night. I started second-guessing my own instincts. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe work really had gotten more demanding. Maybe I was projecting insecurities that had nothing to do with him. I talked myself in circles trying to rationalize away the feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. Then one Friday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and there was a woman I'd never seen before, standing on my porch. She was probably around my age, dressed professionally, and holding a manila folder like she was delivering some kind of official paperwork. For a second I thought maybe she was selling something or doing a survey. Then I saw her face. She looked nervous and angry and sad all at once. She asked if I was me, used my full name. I said yes, confused. Then she asked if I was in a relationship with my partner, said his full name. My stomach dropped, but I nodded. She took a deep breath and said, "I need to show you something. Can I come in?" Every instinct told me to say no, to close the door, to protect myself from whatever she was about to say. But I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in my living room and she opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, hotel receipts with his name on them, text messages with romantic content, the kind of messages you send someone you're building a life with, photos of them together at restaurants, at parks, at places I recognized because he'd told me he was there for work. She told me her name and said she'd been dating my partner for 8 months. 8 months! She'd met him at a conference, thought he was single, started a relationship that felt serious and real. He told her he traveled for work constantly, which explained why they mostly saw each other on weekends and why he was often unavailable during the week. She'd started to suspect something was off about a month ago when he couldn't give her a straight answer about meeting his friends or coming to her family's holiday party. So she hired a private investigator, She actually hired someone to follow him because her gut told her something was wrong, and that investigator led her to my address, to our home, the home I shared with the man she thought was her boyfriend. She genuinely believed I was the other woman, that she was the real relationship, and I was some affair he was having on the side. We sat there in my living room, two complete strangers, comparing timelines and realizing the scope of what he'd done. The nights he told me he was working late, he was with her. The work trips he took every other weekend, he was staying at her place across the state. The client dinners were actual dinners with her. He'd built two completely separate lives and maintained them both for 8 months without either of us knowing. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. She started crying, and so did I. Not because we were heartbroken exactly, though we were, but because the betrayal was so massive and so calculated that it didn't feel real. This wasn't a drunken mistake or a moment of weakness. This was sustained deception on a level that required planning and effort and constant lying to two people who trusted him. But here's the strange part. Sitting there with her, comparing notes, realizing we'd both been manipulated the same way, there was this weird comfort in it. She understood exactly what I was feeling because she was feeling it too. We were both devastated, but we weren't alone in it. We'd both had the same gut feeling that something was wrong. We'd both been made to feel paranoid for trusting our instincts, and we'd both been proven right in the worst possible way. We decided to confront him together. She knew he was supposed to come to my place that evening. He thought she was out of town for work, which was probably why he'd felt safe planning to be home. We waited. She sat on my couch scrolling through her phone while I paced the kitchen trying to figure out what I was going to say. Every few minutes, one of us would remember some detail, some moment that made sense now, and we'd share it like we were piecing together a puzzle we never wanted to solve. He walked in around 7, saw her sitting on the couch, and froze. I've never seen someone's face go through so many expressions so quickly. Confusion, recognition, panic, and then this failed attempt at composure. He tried to play it off, asked what she was doing here like it was a casual, unexpected visit. She held up the folder and his face went white. He tried to lie at first, said we were misunderstanding what we saw, that she was a co-worker and those texts were taken out of context, that the hotel receipts were from legitimate work trips. But we just stared at him. We'd already compared every detail. We knew the truth, and watching him scramble to construct a story that might save him was almost pathetic. When the lies didn't work, he switched tactics, started blaming us, said I was too focused on my own career to pay attention to him, said she was too demanding and he felt pressured, tried to make it sound like he was the victim of two women who didn't understand him, like he'd been forced into maintaining two relationships because neither of us was enough on our own. Things went from bad to unhinged. He actually suggested we all sit down and talk through this like adults, like there was some version of this situation where we'd all just work it out and move forward. Like 8 months of lying to both of us was something that could be resolved with a conversation. We walked out, both of us, just stood up, grabbed our things, and left him standing in my living room. We went to a coffee shop and sat there for 2 hours just talking, processing, trying to figure out how we'd both missed the signs, or if there even were signs to miss. She apologized for showing up at my door like that, said she didn't know how else to handle it. I told her I was grateful, that I might have spent years feeling paranoid, without ever knowing I was right. She's still a friend. We text regularly, meet for coffee every few weeks. There's something bonding about going through that kind of betrayal together. We joke sometimes about starting a support group for people who've been elaborately lied to. Neither of us has much interest in dating right now, but we've become each other's sounding board for processing what happened. As for him, he tried to salvage his reputation with mutual friends, but it didn't work. We both told our sides of the story, and people believed us because how could they not? The evidence was overwhelming. Some of his friends tried the whole, there are two sides to every story thing, but even they couldn't defend maintaining two simultaneous relationships for 8 months. He's essentially been exiled from our social circles. Last I heard, he's still trying to explain himself to people who've already made up their minds. The worst part is that I'd been right the whole time. Every anxious feeling, every moment of doubt, every time I told myself I was being paranoid, I was actually picking up on the truth. He'd made me feel crazy for trusting my instincts, and it turns out my instincts were the only honest thing in the relationship. That's the part I'm still working through in therapy, learning to trust myself again after being gaslit for months into thinking my perception of reality was wrong. But I'm grateful it ended when it did. Grateful that she hired that investigator. Grateful that she had the courage to show up at my door with proof instead of just walking away quietly. Because without that, I might still be there. Still feeling anxious and pushing it down. Still being lied to while thinking I was the problem. Some people find proof in folders, others find it hidden inside something far more festive. I was wrapping Christmas presents in our shared office a week before the holidays. My husband and I both used this space for our work from home setup, so it was cluttered with both our stuff. I'd bought some nice wrapping paper earlier that week and was going through the motions of making everything look presentable. His family gifts, my family gifts, friends, co-workers, the whole routine. I pulled out the roll of silver paper I'd gotten, and something fell out from inside the tube. A crumpled receipt. At first I thought it was mine, maybe something from when I bought the paper. But when I smoothed it out and looked closer, I realized it was from a jewelry store. A nice one. The kind of place you go for real pieces, not costume jewelry. The date was from 2 weeks earlier, and the item listed was a diamond necklace. The price made my heart skip. $2,300. I'm not gonna lie, my immediate reaction was excitement. I thought it was my Christmas gift. That he'd hidden the receipt in the wrapping paper roll, thinking I'd never look there, and I'd accidentally stumbled on the surprise. I felt a little guilty for spoiling it, but also thrilled because that's a serious gift. We'd been married for 6 years, and money had always been tight. A necklace like that meant he was really going all out this year. I tucked the receipt back where I found it and tried to act normal, pretending I had no idea what was coming. Christmas morning arrived and I woke up genuinely excited. We did our usual routine, coffee, breakfast, then presents. I'd gotten him a nice watch and some books he'd wanted. He seemed happy with everything. Then he handed me my gift. It was a medium-sized box wrapped carefully. I opened it expecting to see that jewelry box, that necklace that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. It was a candle set, 3 candles in basic scents, the kind you find at any department store for maybe $40 total. I stared at them trying to keep my face neutral. Maybe this was a decoy and the real gift was coming later. Maybe he'd planned some elaborate reveal. So I thanked him, hugged him, told him they were lovely, and I waited. The day went on. We had lunch, watched movies, relaxed, no second gift, no necklace. By evening I couldn't take it anymore. The confusion was eating at me. I asked him directly if there was anything else, if maybe he'd forgotten something. He looked genuinely puzzled and said no. The candles were it. Did I not like them? I went to the office and grabbed the receipt, brought it back to the living room and handed it to him. Asked him point blank what this was for. The look on his face told me everything before he even opened his mouth. He went completely pale, started stammering about where I found it, how I wasn't supposed to see that. I told him it fell out of the wrapping paper, and I'd assumed it was my gift. So if it wasn't for me, who was it for? He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Then he finally said it. He'd bought the necklace for his coworker, a woman named Jessica, who he'd been working closely with on a major project for the past few months. He said it was a thank you gift for all her support during a particularly rough stretch at work, that she'd really been there for him and he wanted to show his appreciation. A $2,000 necklace for a coworker. As a thank you. I asked him if he understood how insane that sounded. Who buys a coworker a diamond necklace? Who spends that kind of money on someone who isn't their spouse? He kept insisting it wasn't what I thought, that there was nothing romantic going on, that it was purely professional gratitude. But his face said otherwise. He looked guilty, terrified, like he'd been caught doing something he knew was wrong. I asked him if he was having an affair. He said no, not physically. But the way he said it made my stomach turn. Not physically. That meant something else was happening. Something emotional. Something that made him feel like a diamond necklace was an appropriate gift while his actual wife got candles. That's when everything unraveled. I told him I was going to contact Jessica directly and ask her myself. He panicked. Begged me not to. Said it would make things awkward at work, that I was overreacting, that I needed to trust him. But I was done trusting. I found her contact info in his work email, which I had access to because we shared passwords for everything, and I sent her a message. Kept it simple, asked if she could explain the nature of her relationship with my husband and whether she'd received an expensive gift from him recently. She responded within an hour, and she was honest, painfully, brutally honest. She confirmed they'd been emotionally involved for months, that it had started as just venting about work stress, but evolved into something more. Late night texts, long phone calls, sharing things they weren't sharing with their actual partners. She was in a relationship too, apparently. She said my husband had given her the necklace as a promise that he was going to leave me, that they were going to be together once he figured out how to end our marriage without causing too much damage. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I read her message 3 times, trying to make sense of it. My husband had been planning to leave me, had bought another woman a diamond necklace as a symbol of his commitment to her, and I'd been completely oblivious, wrapping Christmas presents and planning meals and living my life while he was building an exit strategy. I confronted him with Jessica's message. He tried to backtrack, said she was exaggerating, that he'd never actually promised to leave me. But the necklace said otherwise. You don't spend $2,000 on a thank you gift. You spend it on someone you're in love with, someone you're planning a future with. Things went from bad to unhinged. He started crying, begging me to understand, saying he'd made a mistake, but it wasn't too late to fix things, that he loved me and wanted to make our marriage work. I asked him if he'd given her the necklace yet. He admitted he had. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, while I was at my parents' house dropping off their gifts, he'd met up with Jessica and given her a diamond necklace. Then came home and wrapped my candles. The sheer disrespect of it was staggering. I told him I wanted a divorce. He fell apart, started making promises about cutting off all contact with Jessica, going to therapy, doing whatever it took. But I was done. You don't come back from something like this. You don't accidentally emotionally cheat on your spouse and buy your affair partner expensive jewelry. Those are deliberate choices made over months. I contacted a lawyer the next day, took screenshots of everything. The receipt, Jessica's messages, text exchanges between her and my husband that I found in his phone after he finally admitted the password. I wanted documentation of everything in case he tried to contest the divorce or make me out to be the unreasonable one. Jessica apparently broke up with her partner too after everything came out. I don't know if she and my husband are still in contact. I don't care. My lawyer advised me not to engage with either of them beyond what was necessary for the divorce proceedings. My husband has been begging for another chance ever since, sending long texts about how he messed up, how he's in therapy now, how he realizes what he lost. He told his family some version of events where I'm overreacting to a misunderstanding. But I sent his mother the receipts. Literally. Showed her the necklace receipt and Jessica's messages. She called him and tore into him. At least someone in his family has sense. The divorce is moving forward. We're splitting assets and it's messy, but I don't care. I'd rather lose half of everything than spend another day married to someone who valued his coworker more than his wife, who spent months building a relationship with someone else while coming home to me every night and pretending everything was fine. The worst part is how normal everything seemed. We weren't fighting, we still had dinner together, watched TV, talked about our days. I had no idea he was living a double life. That every time he said he was working late or had a work call to take, he was probably talking to her, building something with her while our marriage quietly fell apart. He's wearing the guilt now like it's physically weighing him down. Mutual friends say he looks miserable, that he's constantly talking about what a mistake he made. Good. He should feel miserable. He destroyed a 6-year marriage for an affair that fell apart the second it was exposed, and now he's alone with nothing but his regret and a maxed out credit card from buying jewelry for someone who won't even speak to him anymore. I'm doing better than I expected. Some days are hard, but mostly I feel relieved. Relieved that I found out before wasting more years. Relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore. And relieved that I never have to wonder again why I got candles while someone else got diamonds. Receipts expose secrets, but sometimes one single screenshot is enough to tear someone's world apart. I lived with this girl for almost a year before everything fell apart. We'd been friends in college, lost touch after graduation, and reconnected when we both ended up in the same city looking for roommates. It seemed perfect at the time. Someone I already knew, someone I'd gotten along with before, someone who understood my schedule and lifestyle. The first few months were fine, normal roommate stuff. We'd watch TV together sometimes, split groceries, complain about work. Nothing remarkable, but nothing bad either. Then she started missing rent. The first time, she said her paycheck was delayed and she'd have it to me by the end of the week. Fine. Things happen. Except the end of the week came and went with excuses. Her bank was having issues. Her mom was supposed to send money. Her ex owed her and hadn't paid yet. Always something. I covered her portion because I didn't want to get evicted, and she promised she'd pay me back. She never did. By month 3 of this pattern, I'd had enough. I sat her down and told her we needed to figure this out, that I couldn't keep covering her rent and utilities, that she needed to either pay what she owed or we needed to find her a new living situation. She apologized profusely, promised it would get better, said she was going through a tough time, and I was being really insensitive about it. I felt guilty for even bringing it up, which, looking back, was exactly what she wanted. That's when things got weird. Our mutual friends started acting different around me, distant, like they were walking on eggshells or didn't quite trust me. I'd make plans and people would cancel last minute with vague excuses. I'd join group conversations and the energy would shift. I felt like I was losing my mind trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. When I asked my roommate if she'd noticed anything, she'd act concerned and suggest maybe I was stressed, maybe I was reading too much into things, maybe I should talk to someone about my anxiety. The gaslighting was so subtle I didn't recognize it at first. She'd tell me I'd said things I had no memory of saying. She'd rearrange my stuff and insist I must have moved it and forgotten. She'd make plans with our friends and deliberately not invite me, then act surprised when I felt left out, saying she'd definitely told me about it and I must have misunderstood. I started questioning everything: my memory, my perception, my sanity. I felt isolated and confused and completely alone, even though I was surrounded by people who were supposed to be my friends. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification, a screenshot from my roommate. I opened it expecting some meme or funny post she wanted to share. Instead, I saw a group chat I wasn't part of. The participants were 5 of our mutual friends, and the messages were about me. My roommate had sent a long message explaining how I'd been acting erratic and unstable, how I was making up stories about her not paying rent to make her look bad, how she was worried about my mental health. She said I'd been accusing her of things she never did and creating drama out of nowhere. The other people in the chat were responding with concern, asking if she was safe, saying they'd noticed I'd been acting weird lately. One person said they'd already started distancing themselves from me just in case. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I scrolled up through the screenshot, I saw earlier messages from weeks before. My roommate coaching people on what to say to me, what stories to tell, how to make me feel isolated. She literally wrote out lies for people to spread, that I'd been talking badly about them behind their backs, that I'd been flaking on plans I was never actually invited to, that I'd borrowed money I never borrowed and refused to pay it back, all completely fabricated. And she was laughing about it, using laugh emojis and saying things like, she totally bought it and this is too easy. The screenshot had clearly been meant for someone else. She'd probably intended to send it to another friend to show how well her plan was working, but instead she'd sent it directly to me. I just sat there staring at my phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Because here it was, proof, undeniable proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things, that everything I'd been feeling was real and justified. I felt sick and furious and weirdly relieved all at the same time, because for months I'd been doubting myself, wondering if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive or too paranoid or too dramatic. And this screenshot proved that no, I'd been right all along. She'd been deliberately manipulating me and everyone around me because I dared to confront her about not paying rent. I didn't respond to her right away. I took screenshots of the screenshot, backed them up in 3 different places, and then I went through my records. Bank statements showing I'd paid full rent for months while she contributed nothing. Venmo requests she'd ignored. Text messages where she promised to pay me back. Utility bills in my name that she'd agreed to split. I compiled everything into one folder. Then I sent it all to every single person in that group chat. Every person she'd manipulated into thinking I was unstable. I didn't write a long explanation. I didn't defend myself or plead my case. I just sent the screenshot she'd accidentally shared with me. along with all the financial receipts, and wrote one line. "This is what actually happened." The response was immediate. My phone started blowing up within minutes. People apologizing, saying they had no idea, asking how they could have been so stupid. A few people were angry at themselves for believing her. One friend called me crying, saying she felt terrible for avoiding me when I tried to reach out. The group chat my roommate had created apparently exploded with people confronting her, demanding explanations, calling her out for lying. My roommate tried to do damage control. She claimed the screenshot was fake, that I'd edited it somehow, but multiple people had seen the original messages in real time. She tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd been joking, and I was taking it out of context. But there's no context that makes coaching people to spread lies about your roommate. Okay. She tried to flip it back on me, saying I was the one manipulating everyone by sharing private messages, but nobody was buying it anymore. Within 3 days, her entire social circle had turned on her. People who'd been her friends for years wanted nothing to do with her. She was uninvited from group events. People stopped responding to her messages, and our apartment became unbearable. She'd lock herself in her room, and I'd hear her on the phone trying to convince people she wasn't the villain, that I'd orchestrated this whole thing to ruin her. But the evidence spoke for itself. She moved out within a week, didn't give proper notice, didn't clean her room, just packed her stuff and left. She never paid the back rent she owed, never apologized, never acknowledged what she'd done, just vanished and tried to start over somewhere else with people who didn't know the truth yet. The friend group basically dissolved after that. Too much had happened, too much trust had been broken. But honestly, I didn't mind, because the people who'd been so quick to believe lies about me without ever asking my side weren't really my friends anyway. The ones who felt genuinely awful and worked to make amends, those are the people I kept in my life. And I made new friends, better friends, people who actually listen and communicate instead of just accepting whatever narrative is most convenient. It's been almost 2 years and I still think about that screenshot sometimes. How one accidental message completely unraveled months of manipulation. How close I came to actually believing I was the problem. How much damage one person can do when they're willing to lie without conscience. I've never felt more vindicated than I did sending that evidence to everyone she turned against me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed people to know the truth. I needed to stop being seen as unstable and dramatic when I'd been the victim the entire time. And watching her carefully constructed web of lies fall apart in real time was just a bonus. Screenshots save sanity, but sometimes the whole truth only comes out when someone's phone dies at exactly the wrong moment. We'd been arguing for what felt like hours, one of those circular fights where you keep coming back to the same point because nobody's actually being honest about what's really wrong. I was confronting him about his secretive behavior. The constant texting with the phone angled away from me, the way he'd started staying late at work more often, how he'd become weirdly protective of his phone, taking it with him even when he went to the bathroom. He kept denying everything, saying I was paranoid, that I was creating problems where there weren't any. Then, right in the middle of him telling me I was overreacting, his phone died, just went black mid-sentence, and the look on his face was pure panic, not annoyance at a dead battery, actual panic. He grabbed the phone and immediately said not to charge it, that he needed to back things up first, that his phone had been acting weird and he didn't want to lose data by charging it wrong, or some technical excuse that made zero sense. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. People don't panic about a dead phone unless there's something on it they don't want you to see. I told him it was fine, that he could charge it later, trying to play it cool, but inside, I was screaming. Every instinct I'd been trying to suppress for weeks was now on high alert. He went to take a shower about 20 minutes later. The second I heard the water running, I grabbed his phone and plugged it in. My hands were shaking. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I'd turn it on and find nothing, and feel stupid for being so suspicious. But a bigger part of me knew. I knew something was there. I knew his passcode. He'd never hidden it from me because why would he? We'd been together for 2 years, living together for 1. We were supposed to be building something, so I typed it in and the phone unlocked. I went straight to his messages. The first conversation that caught my eye was labeled with a woman's name I recognized. His ex, the one he'd dated for 3 years before me, the one he claimed he hadn't spoken to since they broke up. I opened the thread and my stomach dropped. Months of messages, going back at least 6 months. They weren't just friendly catch-up messages either. They were intimate, planning meetups, talking about how much they missed each other. There were photos, the kind of photos you don't send to someone you're not involved with. And then there were the conversations about me, about how he was only staying with me until the lease was up in a few months, how he needed the housing situation to work out before he could leave, how once he got his finances together, he was going to end things and move back in with her. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was reading these messages in real time, scrolling through months of deception, and it was like watching my entire relationship disintegrate. Everything I thought we had was just a convenience for him, a roof over his head while he rekindled things with his ex. I wasn't his partner, I was his temporary housing solution. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were messages from just 2 days ago where they'd met up for dinner. While I'd been at work, he'd been out with her. He told me he was meeting a friend from college. I'd even asked how it went when he got home, and he'd smiled and said it was good to catch up. He'd looked me in the eye and lied without hesitation. I heard the shower turn off. My heart was racing. I knew he'd be out any second, and I needed to make a decision. So I started forwarding messages to myself. Screenshots of the conversations, the photos, the plans they'd made. I sent myself everything I could in the minute I had. Then I put the phone back down on the charger and waited. He came out of the bathroom in a towel and immediately looked at his phone, saw that it was charging and plugged in. Then he saw me sitting on the couch holding mine. The expression on his face went from confused to terrified in about 2 seconds. He knew. He could tell by the way I was looking at him that I'd seen everything. He lunged for his phone, but I was faster. I held mine up and told him I'd already forwarded everything to myself, that I had copies of all of it. He froze, started stammering about how I had no right to go through his phone, how that was a violation of his privacy. I almost laughed. He was really trying to make this about me invading his privacy when he'd been cheating for months. I told him to pack his things and leave. Right then, that night, he immediately switched tactics, started begging, crying actual tears, saying it wasn't real with her, that it was just messages, that he'd never actually been planning to leave me. But I had the receipts, literally. Messages where they talked about apartment hunting together, photos they'd taken at restaurants I recognized, a whole relationship happening in parallel to ours. He tried every angle, said he loved me and was just confused, that his ex had been manipulating him and he didn't know how to get out of it, that if I just gave him a chance he could explain everything. I didn't want explanations, I wanted him gone. And here's where it gets absurd. He had the audacity to say that kicking him out with nowhere to go was cruel, that I was overreacting and we should talk about this like adults. The man who'd been using me for housing while planning his exit was calling me cruel for telling him to leave. I gave him 2 hours to pack whatever he could fit in his car, told him he could come back for the rest later with advance notice, but that he wasn't sleeping in my apartment that night. He kept trying to negotiate to buy more time, but I was done. Every word out of his mouth was just more noise. He finally started packing, kept stopping to try to talk to me, to convince me I was making a mistake. I ignored him, sat on the couch responding to work emails like he wasn't even there. By midnight he was gone, took his clothes, his laptop, some personal items, left behind furniture we'd bought together and kitchen stuff, and all the little pieces of a shared life. The second the door closed behind him, I changed the locks, called a locksmith that does emergency service, and had new locks installed by 2 a.m. Then I blocked him on everything. Phone, social media, email, all of it. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his apologies, or his attempts to manipulate me into taking him back. I barely slept that night, kept replaying the messages in my head, thinking about all the times he'd lied to my face, all the moments I'd felt like something was off and talked myself out of it, all the nights he'd come home from seeing her and climbed into bed next to me like nothing was wrong. A few days later, I got a message request on social media from his ex. She'd somehow found my profile. The message was short but devastating. She said she needed to talk to me, that she'd just found out he'd been lying to her too. He'd told her we'd broken up months ago, that he was only still living with me because he couldn't afford to move out yet, but that we were completely done. She'd had no idea we were still together, that from her perspective she was dating a single guy who was in a tough housing situation. We ended up talking on the phone for over an hour, comparing timelines, realizing that he'd been playing both of us, lying to her about me, lying to me about her, creating two separate realities and somehow managing to maintain both. She was as devastated as I was. She'd thought they were rebuilding their relationship, that he was finally ready to commit to her again. Instead, she found out he was living with another woman and had been the entire time. She broke up with him too, told me she sent him a long message outlining every lie he'd told, and then blocked him everywhere just like I had. We both agreed that whatever he said to try to win either of us back couldn't be trusted. That someone who could deceive that thoroughly, that consistently, for that long wasn't capable of the honesty a real relationship requires. He tried reaching out through mutual friends, sent messages through people we both knew, asking them to tell me he was sorry, that he wanted to talk. I told everyone the same thing. I wasn't interested. There was nothing he could say that would change what he'd done. The lease was in my name only, thankfully. He'd moved in with me into my place, so there was no legal complication with him leaving. I didn't owe him anything. Some of his friends tried to paint me as heartless for kicking him out so suddenly, but when I showed them the screenshots of what I'd found, they went quiet real fast. It's been a few months now. I'm doing better. Still processing the betrayal, but getting there. I've been in therapy working through trust issues and trying to figure out how I missed the signs for so long. My therapist keeps reminding me that people who are determined to deceive you will find ways to do it, that it's not a reflection of my judgment or awareness, but it's hard not to feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. The ex-girlfriend and I aren't friends exactly, but we check in occasionally. There's a strange bond between people who've been lied to by the same person. We both got played and we both got out. That's worth something. As for him, I heard through mutual friends that he's still trying to date, still telling elaborate stories, still making himself the victim. Some people never learn. They just find new people to lie to. Phones expose liars, but what about when the accusations start flying in the other direction? I spent months feeling like I was losing my mind. Every time I asked my girlfriend about her constant texting, she'd flip it on me, tell me I was being insecure, that I clearly had trust issues I needed to work on, that questioning her every move was controlling and toxic. She made me feel like I was the problem, like my gut feeling that something was off was just my own paranoia manifesting. She was always on her phone, always. During dinner, during movies, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and when I'd glance over, she'd angle the screen away or lock it quickly. When I asked who she was talking to so much, she'd say it was her study group, that they had a group chat going for their classes, and it was just constant communication about assignments and exam prep. It sounded reasonable enough. I was in grad school too. I knew how those group chats could blow up, but something felt wrong. The way she'd smile at her phone sometimes, the way she'd get up and leave the room to respond to certain messages, the way she'd stay up late texting after I'd gone to bed. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself I was being paranoid like she said, that I needed to trust her and stop looking for problems. One night she was working on a paper at the kitchen table, had her laptop open, her phone next to it, textbooks spread out everywhere. I was in the living room watching TV when she got up to take a shower, left everything right there. Her laptop was still open, screen facing away from me. I sat there for a few minutes trying to focus on the show, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, about all the times she'd called me insecure, about how she'd made me doubt my own perception of reality. I walked over to the table, told myself I was just going to close the laptop so it didn't die, but when I got close enough to reach for it, I saw the screen. She'd left GroupMe open, a chat called Girls' Night. I recognized the names, her 3 closest friends, women I'd met dozens of times at parties and dinners, women who'd been friendly to my face. I should have closed it, should have walked away, but I didn't. I started reading. And what I found made my blood run cold. They weren't talking about studying. They were talking about her affair with our mutual friend, a guy we both hung out with regularly, someone who'd been to our apartment, who I'd considered a friend. The messages went back months, discussions about when and where to meet up, jokes about me being clueless, her friends giving her advice on how to hide it better, when to delete messages, what excuses to use. One message from 2 weeks ago stuck out. She'd written, he asked about all the texting again, and one of her friends had responded, just keep calling him insecure, it's working. Another friend had added a laughing emoji and said, men are so easy to gaslight. I felt sick, physically sick, because it had worked. She'd been cheating on me for months, and every time I questioned anything, she turned it around and made me feel like I was the problem. Like my instincts were wrong, like I was toxic for even suspecting. I grabbed my phone and started taking screenshots. Every message, every joke at my expense, every time they'd coordinated her cheating, every piece of advice her friends had given her about manipulating me. I saved everything to 3 different places. Then I closed the laptop and went back to the couch. She came out of the shower 20 minutes later, got back to her paper like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything that night. I needed time to process what I'd found, to figure out how to handle it. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part knew she'd just deny everything. Call me crazy. Tell me I'd misunderstood what I'd read. The next morning, I waited until she was awake and having coffee. Then I asked her point blank if there was anything she needed to tell me. She looked confused, asked what I meant. I said I knew about her and our mutual friend. Her face went through so many expressions: shock, panic, anger. She immediately asked how I knew. I told her I'd seen the group chat, and that's when she went on the offensive, started yelling about how I had no right to look at her private messages, that I'd violated her privacy and trust, that I was being invasive and controlling, and this proved she was right about me being insecure. She was trying to make this about me going through her laptop instead of about her months-long affair. I stayed calm, told her I had screenshots, and asked if she wanted to see them. She went silent, just stared at me. I pulled up my phone and started showing her. Her own words, her friend's advice, the jokes about me, the planning, all of it. She tried to deny it at first, said the messages were taken out of context, that it wasn't what it looked like. But there's no context that makes "coordinate your affair better" mean something innocent. I sent her the screenshots while she watched. Every single one. Then I told her I was sending them to our mutual friend too. That's when she really panicked, started begging me not to, saying we could work this out, that she'd made a mistake but it didn't mean anything, that she loved me and wanted to fix things. I asked her how long it had been going on. She wouldn't answer. I asked if she'd slept with him. She looked at the floor. I sent the screenshots to him anyway. Didn't write anything. Just sent the evidence and waited. He called me 5 minutes later, tried to explain, said it had just happened, that they'd gotten drunk one night and things escalated and then it kept happening, that he felt terrible and was planning to tell me. I asked when. When was he planning to tell me? He didn't have an answer. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I sent the screenshots to her friends, the ones in the group chat, the ones who'd been helping her hide it, who'd been laughing about gaslighting me. I wanted them to know that I knew, that their private jokes weren't private anymore. The fallout was immediate. Her friends stopped talking to her. Apparently they were horrified that I'd seen their messages, that their advice had been exposed, that they were now implicated in the whole thing. They blamed her for not being more careful, for leaving her laptop open, for getting them involved. Things went from bad to unhinged. She tried to paint herself as the victim, told people I'd hacked into her accounts and violated her privacy. But the mutual friends who saw the screenshots knew the truth. They knew what she'd done, what her friends had helped her do. The narrative she tried to spin didn't stick because the evidence was too clear. She moved out within 2 weeks, kept saying I'd ruined her friendships, that I'd destroyed her support system out of spite. I told her she'd done that herself, that her friends stopped talking to her because she'd made them complicit in her cheating and then got them exposed. That wasn't on me. Our mutual friend tried to apologize, sent me a long message about how sorry he was, how he'd made a terrible mistake, how he hoped we could move past it. I blocked him. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. It's been a few months now. I don't feel guilty about looking at that laptop. I don't feel guilty about sending the screenshots. I don't feel guilty about any of it, because if I hadn't looked, I'd still be there. Still being called insecure, still being gaslit, still doubting my own instincts while she carried on an affair right in front of me. She called me insecure for months, weaponized my trust against me, made me feel crazy for noticing what was right in front of my face, and her friends helped her do it, coached her through it, laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me. The group chat betrayed her in the end. All that careful planning, all that coordination, all those inside jokes, exposed in one careless moment. She got sloppy, left the evidence right there in the open, and now she has to live with the consequences. Group chats betray liars, but sometimes entire families conspire to hide the truth in plain sight. Christmas dinner at my grandmother's house has always been this big production. The whole extended family shows up aunts, uncles, cousins, sometimes even distant relatives nobody's seen in years. It's loud and chaotic and usually pretty fun. Everyone brings dishes, we eat too much, the kids run around screaming, and my grandmother presides over it all like she's hosting a state dinner. This year felt normal at first. Same faces, same traditions, same arguments about who makes the best stuffing. We'd just finished the main course and people were starting to clear plates when my uncle stood up with his wine glass. He does this every year, gives some speech about family and gratitude. Usually it's sweet and a little cheesy but harmless. This year felt different though. He was already pretty drunk. I'd watched him refill his glass multiple times during dinner, and he had that loose, emotional look people get when alcohol hits them sideways. He started talking about how grateful he was for everyone's support through this difficult year, how the divorce had been hard on him, but knowing he had family made it bearable. People nodded sympathetically. We all knew about the divorce. It had happened over the summer and had been fairly civil as far as anyone knew. His ex-wife, my aunt, was even there at the table with her new partner. That's how amicable everyone thought it was. They were co-parenting well, staying friendly, doing the mature thing. My uncle kept talking, getting more emotional, thanking people individually. Then he said something that made the entire room go quiet. He said he was especially grateful his kids still didn't know the real reason their mother left. Just said it, out loud, in front of everyone, including his ex-wife, including his teenage kids. The silence was immediate and heavy. My aunt's face went from neutral to furious in about 2 seconds. My uncle seemed to realize what he'd said and tried to laugh it off, started backtracking, saying he meant the financial stress, the business problems, nothing serious. But it was too late. My cousin, his 16-year-old daughter, was already demanding to know what he meant. What real reason? Why was there a secret? My uncle tried to deflect, said he'd misspoken, that the wine was talking, that everyone should just enjoy dessert. But my cousin wasn't backing down. She stood up and asked her mom directly. What was he talking about? What didn't they know? My aunt just sat there staring at my uncle with this look of absolute betrayal. Because whatever the secret was, she'd clearly been keeping it to protect the kids, and he'd just blown it up in front of the entire family because he couldn't hold his liquor. My grandmother tried to intervene, suggested they discuss this privately, but my cousin was crying now, saying she had a right to know, that she was tired of being treated like a child. My uncle's son, who's 14, was looking between his parents trying to figure out what was happening. The whole table had gone completely still, everyone watching this unfold like it was a play they hadn't bought tickets for. That's when everything unraveled. My aunt finally spoke. She said fine, if he was going to ruin Christmas, then she might as well tell the truth. She looked at her kids and said their father hadn't just been dealing with business stress. He'd been embezzling from his own company, taking money from client accounts to cover personal expenses. And when that wasn't enough, he'd started gambling, online poker, sports betting, whatever he could access from his phone. He'd gambled away their savings, their kids' college funds, the money they'd been setting aside for retirement, everything. She'd found out by accident when their accountant called her concerned about some irregularities. When she confronted my uncle, he'd broken down and admitted everything. She'd given him an ultimatum. Get help, pay back what he could, and come clean to the family. Or she was leaving. He'd promised to do all of it. But then he started spinning this story about the divorce being about financial stress from the business. Made himself sound like a victim of a tough economy instead of someone who'd stolen and gambled away his family's future. My aunt had kept quiet because she didn't want their kids to lose respect for their father. Didn't want them to grow up knowing he was a thief and a compulsive gambler. She'd taken the blame for the divorce, let people think she'd left for vague personal reasons, protected his reputation at the cost of her own, and he'd just thrown that sacrifice away because he got drunk and sentimental. The table erupted. My grandmother started crying. My dad, who's my uncle's brother, started yelling at him, asking if it was true. My uncle tried to defend himself, said my aunt was exaggerating, that he'd made some mistakes but he was working on it. My aunt cut him off and said working on it would have meant telling the truth, would have meant facing consequences instead of letting everyone think she was the one who destroyed the marriage. My cousin was sobbing. Her brother looked shell-shocked. Other relatives were demanding details. How much money? Was the business going under? Had he broken any laws? The Christmas dinner that had been warm and festive 20 minutes ago had turned into complete chaos. My uncle's kids left, just got up and walked out. My aunt followed them. Her new partner, who'd been sitting through this whole nightmare, probably wondering what family he'd gotten involved with, went with her. They took their coats and left my grandmother's house without another word. My uncle tried to go after them, but my dad stopped him, told him he'd done enough damage, that he needed to sit down and sober up and figure out how he was going to fix this. My uncle started crying then, actual tears running down his face, while he tried to explain that he never meant for it to go this far, that the gambling had started small and spiraled, that he'd been ashamed and didn't know how to ask for help, that he'd thought he could fix it before anyone found out. Nobody was sympathetic. My grandmother told him to leave, her own son. She told him to get out of her house and not come back until he was ready to face what he'd done with honesty. My dad offered to drive him home since he was too drunk. They left together, my dad looking disgusted and my uncle looking broken. The rest of us just sat there in the wreckage of Christmas dinner. Dessert sat untouched on the counter. Someone started crying quietly. I think it was one of my younger cousins who didn't fully understand what had happened but knew it was bad. My grandmother eventually got up and started clearing dishes mechanically, like going through the motions would somehow restore normalcy. People started leaving earlier than usual. Nobody wanted to pretend things were fine. The holiday was ruined and everyone knew it. On the drive home, my parents talked in low voices about what this meant for the family. Whether my uncle's business would survive, whether he'd face legal trouble, whether his kids would ever forgive him. It's been a few months now and the family still hasn't recovered. My uncle's kids are living full-time with my aunt and barely speaking to him. He's supposedly in therapy and attending Gamblers Anonymous, but the trust is shattered. My grandmother's annual Easter dinner got quietly cancelled because nobody wanted a repeat of Christmas. Family group chats that used to be active and friendly are now silent. My aunt has been vindicated in a way, but she doesn't seem happy about it. She'd kept that secret to protect her kids, and it came out anyway in the worst possible way. My uncle destroyed his relationship with his children, his standing in the family, and his own mother's trust, all because he couldn't keep his mouth shut while drunk. The worst part is how preventable it all was. If he'd just stayed quiet, if he'd accepted people's sympathy for the divorce story without adding that one extra detail, if he'd controlled his drinking or his need for validation, but he didn't. He needed everyone to know he was suffering, to pity him, and in trying to get that sympathy, he exposed the one thing that made him unworthy of it. One drunken sentence dismantled years of careful secret keeping and destroyed what was left of a family trying to stay civil through divorce. All at Christmas dinner, in front of everyone, including the kids who were never supposed to know. Toasts can expose secrets, but sometimes debt and lies hit closer to home than anyone realizes. I was sitting at my parents' dining room table on a regular Sunday afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary. My mum had made her usual pot roast. We were all catching up, the normal family dinner routine we'd been doing for years. Then my mom said something that made my fork freeze halfway to my mouth. She looked at me with this warm, proud smile and said she was really proud of me for finally getting my credit back on track, that it took a lot of discipline and she knew how hard I'd been working on it. I just stared at her, confused, because my credit was fine. I'd always been careful with money, paid everything on time, never carried debt I couldn't handle. I asked her what she meant. The smile faded from her face and she looked genuinely surprised. She said my brother had told the whole family months ago that I'd gotten into some financial trouble, run up a bunch of debt, and was working really hard to fix the mess I'd made. My brother was sitting right there across from me. I looked at him and he wouldn't meet my eyes, just kept pushing food around his plate like suddenly his dinner was the most interesting thing in the world. I asked him directly what he'd told everyone. He mumbled something about a misunderstanding, that he must have gotten his facts mixed up. My dad jumped in and said it wasn't a big deal, that we all have money troubles sometimes, nothing to be embarrassed about. But I wasn't embarrassed. I was confused and increasingly angry. Because I hadn't had money troubles, I hadn't run up debt, and my brother had apparently been telling my entire family that I had. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom, pulled out my phone and logged into my credit monitoring app, something I checked maybe once every few months, just to make sure everything looked normal. It didn't look normal. There were accounts I'd never opened, credit cards from companies I'd never applied to, and they were all in collections. thousands of dollars of debt attached to my name that I had absolutely no memory of creating. My heart was pounding. I went through each one, trying to figure out what was happening. The addresses on file were my old apartment, the one I'd lived in 3 years ago, the one my brother had stayed at for 6 months when he was between jobs. I came back to the table and asked to speak to my brother outside. He tried to brush it off, said we could talk later, but I wasn't budging. My parents looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. We went out to the backyard and I asked him point blank if he'd opened credit cards in my name. The look on his face told me everything. He went pale, started stammering, tried to deny it at first, but I pulled up my phone and showed him the credit report, showed him the accounts, asked him to explain how they got there if he didn't open them, and finally, he broke down and admitted it. He'd been doing it for 2 years, started when he was living with me, and had access to my mail, my personal documents, everything he needed to steal my identity. He said he'd been in a bad place financially and just needed some help getting through, that he'd always planned to pay it back before I found out, that it had spiraled out of control and he didn't know how to fix it without admitting what he'd done. 2 years. He'd been destroying my credit for 2 years while telling our family that I was the one with money problems, covering his tracks by making them think any issues that came up were my fault. And here's where it gets absurd. He had the nerve to beg me not to press charges, said that if I reported it, he'd face fraud charges, that it would ruin his life, that we were family and family doesn't send family to jail over money. I told him he should have thought about that before he committed a felony using my identity. He started crying, actual tears, saying he was sorry, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd do anything to make it right. I asked him how much he owed across all the accounts. He didn't know. Hadn't been keeping track, just kept opening new cards when the old ones maxed out. I went back inside and told my parents what he'd done, laid out the whole thing, the identity theft, the debt, the lies about me having financial problems to cover his own crimes. I expected them to be furious at him, to be as horrified as I was. Instead, my dad asked if we could work it out privately, said that getting the police involved would only make things worse, that my brother had admitted his mistake and was willing to make it right. My mum was crying, saying she couldn't believe this was happening, asking if I was really going to destroy my relationship with my brother over money. Over money, like he hadn't committed fraud, like he hadn't stolen my identity and trashed my credit and lied to everyone about it for years. I left that night and filed a police report the next morning, brought all the documentation, the credit report, the account information, everything. The officer I spoke to said identity theft cases involving family members were common and that I was doing the right thing by reporting it, that without a police report I'd have a much harder time disputing the debt and clearing my name. Then came the breaking point. My family started calling, my mum, my dad, my aunts and uncles who'd apparently been filled in on the situation, all of them trying to guilt me into dropping the charges, saying I was tearing the family apart, that my brother had made a mistake but he was trying to fix it, that sending him to jail wouldn't solve anything. I told every single one of them the same thing. He destroyed our relationship when he stole my identity, when he opened accounts in my name and maxed them out, when he lied about me to cover his tracks. I didn't destroy anything. He did, and now he had to face the consequences of his choices. Some family members understood. My cousin reached out privately and said she'd had something similar happen with a friend, and she knew how violating it felt. A couple of my dad's siblings said they supported my decision, even though it was hard, but most of them sided with my brother, said I was being vindictive, that I should be the bigger person and let it go. The criminal case moved forward. My brother tried to avoid it, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'd used my social security number, my name, my information. There was a paper trail connecting him to the fraud. He eventually took a plea deal, got probation and court-ordered restitution. Has to pay back every cent he stole, with interest, on a payment plan supervised by the court. My credit is slowly recovering. I've disputed every fraudulent account, filed identity theft reports with all 3 credit bureaus, and worked with the creditors to get the debt removed from my record. It's been a nightmare of paperwork and phone calls and documentation, but it's getting better. My score has gone up over 100 points in the past year. I've cut off everyone who defended him, my parents included, because if they can look at what he did and decide I'm the villain for holding him accountable, then they're not people I want in my life. I told them they could have a relationship with both of us, but I wouldn't be attending any family functions where he'd be present. They chose him, so I chose myself. My brother has tried to reach out a few times, apology texts that feel more like attempts to ease his own guilt than genuine remorse. I don't respond. There's nothing he can say that changes what he did, nothing that rebuilds the trust he obliterated. People ask me sometimes if I regret pressing charges, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The answer is no. He committed a crime, a serious one that affected my financial future, my credit, my ability to get loans or rent apartments or do anything that requires a credit check. And he did it knowingly, repeatedly, for years. Then tried to manipulate me into covering for him by invoking family loyalty. That's not what family does. Family doesn't steal from you and then ask you to protect them from consequences. And I refuse to feel guilty for refusing to be complicit in my own victimization. Identity theft destroys trust, but workplace theft can be just as devastating and public. I'd been working on this presentation for 3 months. 3 months of late nights, research, data analysis, revisions. It was for a major client, the kind that could make or break our quarterly numbers. My boss had assigned it to me specifically because he knew I could handle it. The project was complex, required deep technical knowledge of our product, and needed to be presented in a way that was both comprehensive and accessible. I'd poured everything into it. Sarah was a co-worker in my department. We weren't particularly close, but we'd always been professional with each other. She'd been with the company about a year longer than me, but we were at roughly the same level. The day before the big client meeting, she stopped by my desk and asked if she could review my presentation. Said she wanted to help, that a fresh set of eyes might catch something I'd missed. It seemed reasonable, collaborative even. So I sent her the file. The meeting was scheduled for 9 the next morning. I got there early, set up my laptop, made sure all the tech was working. The client arrived with their team, my boss was there, a few other people from our department. I was ready, nervous but confident. I knew this presentation inside and out. Then Sarah walked in, sat down, and opened her laptop. My boss started the meeting with introductions and then turned to Sarah, said she'd be walking us through the proposal today. I felt my stomach drop. I looked at him confused, started to say something, but he was already gesturing for Sarah to begin. She stood up, connected her laptop to the projector, and my slides appeared on the screen. My exact slides, with my formatting, my data visualizations, my talking points. She started presenting, using my words, my research, my analysis. She delivered it smoothly, confidently, like she'd created every bit of it herself. My boss was nodding along, taking notes. The client team looked impressed, and I just sat there completely frozen, trying to process what was happening. She was stealing my work in real time, in front of everyone, and doing it so brazenly that I almost couldn't believe it. I kept waiting for her to acknowledge me, to say, "We developed this," or "My colleague contributed," something, anything. But she didn't. She presented the entire thing as her sole creation, even the parts that required deep technical knowledge that I knew she didn't have. She was reading from my script, using my metaphors, presenting my solutions. When she got to the section about projected ROI, the client's finance person asked a clarifying question. Sarah answered it perfectly, because I'd written the answer in my notes I'd sent her along with the presentation. She had everything, my work, my words, my ideas, and she was taking credit for all of it. My boss praised her when she finished, called it exceptional work, said he was impressed by her initiative and depth of understanding. The client team nodded in agreement, said they were excited to move forward. Sarah smiled and thanked everyone, sat down looking pleased with herself. I was shaking, literally shaking with anger and disbelief. Part of me wanted to stand up right then and call her out, but another part was still processing, still trying to understand how this was happening, how someone could be this blatant, this shameless. Then I had an idea. I raised my hand and asked Sarah a question, very calmly, very professionally. I asked if she could explain the methodology behind slide 12. It was one of the most technical sections of the presentation, a detailed breakdown of our algorithm and how it would integrate with the client's existing systems. I'd spent 2 weeks on that section alone, consulting with our development team, running tests, verifying every claim. Sarah's face changed, just slightly. A flicker of panic before she recovered and tried to answer. She started explaining it but immediately got it wrong. Used the wrong terminology, described a process that didn't match what was on the slide. I watched her fumble through it, guessing, trying to sound confident while clearly having no idea what she was talking about. When she finished her fumbling explanation, I pulled out my laptop, opened my files, and very calmly said I had some concerns about the accuracy of what she'd just described. My boss looked confused. I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up my original files, the ones with timestamps, the ones with my name on every draft going back 3 months. I showed the progression of the project, early drafts from November, revisions from December, the final version I'd sent to Sarah just yesterday, all of it clearly created by me, saved under my user account, with metadata that proved when each section had been developed. Then I explained the actual methodology behind slide 12, the real process, the technical details Sarah had just gotten completely wrong. I walked through it step by step, referencing the research I'd done, the consultations with our dev team, the testing protocols I'd implemented. The room went dead silent. My boss was staring at Sarah with this expression of dawning horror. The client's team leader asked the question I'd been waiting for. Why was Sarah presenting work she clearly didn't create? Sarah tried to recover, said we'd collaborated on it, that it was a team effort. I pulled up my emails, showed the thread where I'd sent her the final presentation the day before, where she'd simply replied, "Thanks, looks great." No collaboration, no contribution, just her asking to review it and then stealing it wholesale. My boss asked Sarah directly if she'd created this presentation. She started stammering, said she'd worked on parts of it, that she'd helped with research. I asked her which parts specifically. She couldn't answer, couldn't name a single section she'd contributed to, because she hadn't contributed to any of them. And here's where it gets absurd. She actually tried to say that sending her the file meant I wanted her to present it, that it was implied I was handing off the project to her. My boss shut that down immediately, asked why, if that were true, I'd showed up to the meeting with my own laptop ready to present. Why I had months of documented work. Why I knew technical details she clearly didn't. The client meeting basically ended there. The clients were uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to be part of whatever internal drama was unfolding. My boss apologized to them, assured them the proposal was solid regardless of the presentation confusion, and promised to follow up later. They left quickly. Once they were gone, my boss asked to speak with Sarah and me separately. He talked to her first. I waited outside his office for 20 minutes. When she came out, she wouldn't look at me. Her face was red and she left the building immediately. My boss called me in, asked me to walk him through everything. I showed him all my files, all my documentation, the entire timeline of the project's development. He was furious, not at me, but at the situation. He apologized for not confirming who was presenting beforehand. Said he'd assumed when Sarah set up her laptop that I'd briefed her or that we were co-presenting. He removed her from the project immediately. I took over all client communication, had a follow-up call with them that afternoon where I presented properly and answered all their questions. They signed with us 2 weeks later. Sarah was fired within the month. Not immediately because HR had to do their investigation, but the outcome was inevitable. She'd committed blatant plagiarism, stolen work, attempted to claim credit for something she had zero involvement in creating, and she'd done it in front of clients and management. I got promoted 6 months later. My boss cited the client project as evidence of my capabilities and initiative, said the way I'd handled the situation showed both technical skill and professional integrity. Sarah's tried to rebuild her professional reputation, but it's not going well. Our industry is smaller than people think. Word gets around. I've heard from former colleagues that she struggled to find work at the same level, that when people do reference checks, our company's HR gives factual information about why her employment ended. You can't come back from being known as someone who steals credit. The whole thing could have been avoided if she'd just been honest, if she'd asked to collaborate legitimately, if she'd contributed something real instead of trying to pass off someone else's months of work as her own. But she didn't. She saw an opportunity to take a shortcut to recognition and took it without thinking about the consequences. People think they can get away with things like this, that in the moment, with confidence and audacity, they can claim work that isn't theirs and no one will question it. And sometimes they can. If I hadn't known the technical details, if I hadn't had documentation, if I'd been too intimidated to speak up, She might have gotten away with it, but I did know the details. I had the receipts, and I wasn't going to sit there and watch someone take credit for 3 months of my life. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always finds a way out, whether it's hidden in wrapping paper, buried in a group chat, or waiting in a DNA test. Sometimes staying silent protects no one, and the moment you finally speak up is the moment everything changes. Sleep well, keep your receipts, and I'll see you in the next story.